After spending years in Congress, I never imagined my biggest challenge would be with my own homeowners association when they shot my service dog Max, all in the name of property values. This incident turned my life upside down. But once people found out who I was and the influence I held, their neatly organized world began to unravel. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, would seeking justice for Max jeopardize my career? Let's rewind to the day I moved into Old Estates, my dream home. It had a charming little garden, an ideal space for Max, my golden retriever, to roam freely. He had saved my life countless times during my most difficult moments after returning from overseas. Little did I know that this garden would soon feel more like a battleground. The first week passed without any issues. I kept to myself, focusing on housing bills that were mostly under the radar. Just another homeowner, I thought, aiming for a quiet life. Max was always by my side, helping me navigate my PTSD episodes with his calm presence. My neighbors greeted me with smiles and waves, probably thinking I was just another remote worker. Then, I received the first note. A pink piece of paper was taped to my door, scrawled with angry messages that seemed to tear through the paper. It accused me of violating HOA codes regarding unauthorized pets. I chuckled initially. Clearly, they didn't understand service animal laws. I pulled out my phone to snap a picture when I met her gaze for the first time. "You must be the new neighbor breaking our rules," the woman declared as she marched across my lawn. She had perfectly styled hair, a designer outfit, and an expression that radiated entitlement. "I'm Karen Martinez, chair of the HOA Community Standards Committee." It felt less like an introduction and more like a royal proclamation. "Nice to meet you. I'm James, and this is Max, my service dog." I replied calmly, relying on my years of experience in Congress to keep my composure. I reached for Max's papers, but she was already shaking her head. "We don't allow large dogs here. They lower property values. Barbara Thompson, our HOA president, has very specific guidelines about this," she informed me, her eyes narrowing at Max, who sat quietly by my side. "Really, you don't look disabled," she added, making my grip on Max's leash tighten. I wanted to explain that not all challenges are visible, but instead, I chose to keep it simple. "I understand your concern, but service animals are protected under federal law, and I have all the necessary documentation." She pulled out her phone, and I knew this was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. I was taking pictures of my house, my garden, and Max when Karen stormed off, her designer sneakers leaving marks on my freshly watered lawn. That night, I found it hard to sleep. Max could tell I was anxious and snuggled closer than usual. I thought about the heated arguments I used to witness in Congress, but Karen's threat felt personal. If you've made it this far and are enjoying the drama of these HOA stories, you're not alone. Don't miss out on the rest of the story. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for even more shocking twists. While Max curled up next to my desk, I looked up the HOA rules for Oak Estates, searching for anything about service animals. There was nothing. It seemed they'd never considered such a situation. The next morning, I woke up to find the word violation spray-painted in bright red on my garden fence. Through my security footage, I noticed Karen directing someone to do it at 6 a.m. The paint was still wet to the touch, and I spotted Max's paw prints tracking the red across the sidewalk. It was exactly what they wanted. As I started drafting an email to the HOA board, another knock sounded at the door. This time it was Barbara Thompson, the HOA president, holding a thick folder of complaints. She barely made eye contact with me, her gaze fixed on Max with obvious distaste. "Mr. Sullivan, we pride ourselves on maintaining certain standards," she said, her voice laced with insincerity. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in another neighborhood?" Max pressed against my leg, offering comfort as he often did during anxious moments. That's when I noticed Karen in the background, filming everything on her phone, likely anticipating a reaction from me. They didn't know who they were up against or the laws they were breaking, but I needed to tread carefully. "Thank you for your concern, Barbara. I will review these complaints thoroughly." I took the folder, wearing my best poker face, the same one I'd used during tense committee hearings. "By the way, does the HOA have insurance for violations of federal housing laws?" Her smile faltered for just a moment, and suddenly Karen stopped recording. Neither of them realized it yet, but they had just stirred up a battle they couldn't win. As I closed the door, I overheard them whispering urgently. Max looked up at me, his eyes full of understanding, and I scratched behind his ears. "Don't worry, buddy. They have no idea what's coming." That night, more neighbors reported strange damage to their properties, all in the vicinity of mine. I watched from my window as Karen guided Barbara around, pointing at homes and taking photos. My security cameras caught every moment. I had a nagging sense that this was only the beginning. Everything changed that morning, not just for me and Max, but for countless homeowners across America. I woke to the sound of a camera clicking outside my window. There was Karen Martinez, clad in her pink jogging suit, snapping pictures of my front yard at 6:30 a.m. Max, my service dog, perked up at the noise, letting out a low growl. Karen had already been to my home 3 times this week, declaring it her mission to document what she called dog poop ruining our property values. I hadn't even had my morning coffee yet. Max never leaves messes. His training was thorough. I knew this well, as I had invested 2 years and around $30,000 to ensure he was specially trained after my last deployment. As I grabbed my phone to record her trespassing, Karen's face turned crimson. "You can't film me! This is harassment!" she cried, stamping her foot like a child throwing a tantrum. The irony of her accusation was lost on her. Later that morning, I discovered printed flyers in everyone's mailbox. They warned about dangerous animals in the neighborhood, featuring a grainy photo of Max sleeping in my front yard. Karen had drawn red circles around his mouth, which only showed him yawning. I kept one as evidence, adding to my growing file of harassment incidents from the HOA. My security cameras captured Karen sending her teenage son, Tommy, to plant fake dog waste in my yard. He looked so embarrassed, silently mouthing sorry to my front door camera. I couldn't blame him. Karen seemed like the type of mom who would ground him for refusing to comply. The real trouble began during my evening walk with Max. As we passed the community garden I had helped plant last spring, I spotted Karen with Barbara Thompson, the HOA president. They were pointing at my tomato plants. "They're not regulation height," Karen insisted, waving around a ruler. "And who knows what diseases that dog could spread to our vegetables." I stopped, took out my phone, and played the recording from our last HOA meeting, where they had specifically approved my garden plans. Karen's face went through a spectrum of colors, turning a deep shade of purple. "You're not allowed to record meetings," she screeched. I calmly pointed out that I had checked the state laws before moving here. That night, while making dinner, I noticed something strange. Max started barking frantically at the window, so I rushed outside. To my horror, I found my entire garden wilting. Someone had sprayed it with industrial-strength weed killer, targeting the very plants I had grown for our community food bank. I watched in disbelief as the scene unfolded. The security cameras captured Karen's husband, Mike, dressed in a black hoodie, behaving suspiciously. I promptly called Officer Martinez to report what I had seen. Thankfully, she was not related to Karen. Officer Martinez took photos and carefully documented everything. As she reviewed the situation, she spoke softly. "We've received 7 complaints about this HOA just this month." Handing me her card, she gave me a look that suggested she understood the gravity of the situation. The next morning, I noticed Karen had called an emergency HOA meeting to address concerns about property values. Through my window, I could see our neighbors arriving at her home. Some seemed uneasy, while others appeared to relish the unfolding drama. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Jackson, who was fond of my dog Max, caught my gaze and shook her head sadly as she walked past. She discreetly slipped a note into my mailbox. It warned, "They're planning something big. Be careful." Feeling a bit anxious, I shared clips from my security cameras with an old friend at a local news station. Not for publication, but just as a precaution. Then I settled at my desk, pulled out my congressional letterhead, and began drafting a letter addressing discriminatory housing practices. My hands trembled slightly as I typed, but Max instinctively pressed his head against my leg, offering me comfort. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang as a rock hit my window. I looked outside to see Tommy Martinez standing there, tears streaming down his face. His mother held him back, forcing him to throw another rock. Neighbors gathered in their driveways, recording the chaos on their phones, but none dared to intervene. The second rock shattered my living room window. I reached for my phone, realizing that tomorrow's HOA meeting was about to take an unexpected turn. This time, I wouldn't just be another homeowner. I had a point to make. As I entered the HOA meeting room, my heart raced, while Max leaned against me, sensing my tension. The room fell silent as I walked in, and I could feel all eyes on me. Karen's voice broke the stillness as she whispered loudly, "He's breaking the rules again by bringing that dog in here." Taking a deep breath, I recalled my training from many debates in Washington. While this wasn't my first fight, it felt like the most personal one yet. Barbara Thompson, with her meticulously styled gray hair and crisp blazer, stood at the podium, exuding a rigidity that matched her demeanor. "Before we start tonight's meeting, we have an urgent issue to address concerning unauthorized pets and property values," she announced, and I felt the weight of their gazes on me. A few neighbors in the room cast quick glances at Max and me before looking away, their expressions showing clear discomfort. They understood what was about to happen, but seemed too intimidated to speak up against the HOA board. I gently patted Max's head, finding comfort in his calm demeanor. Then, Karen Martinez shot up from her seat, waving a handful of papers. "I have documented evidence that this dog has been urinating on my prize-winning roses. My children can't even play in our yard anymore because of allergies." I had to suppress a laugh. Just yesterday, her kids were at the community pool, happily playing with the Watson's Labrador without issues. I stood up slowly, pulling out Max's service animal certification along with a copy of the Fair Housing Act. Max is a registered service animal, and under federal law, he is protected. But before I could finish, Karen interrupted. "We don't care about your so-called federal laws. This is a private community, and we make our own rules." Her face was flushed as she advanced toward me, finger pointed. "My property values have dropped 15% since you moved in with that mutt." Suddenly, the room erupted in chaos. Some residents voiced their concerns about property values while others defended me amid the noise. In the corner, I noticed Tom Thompson, Barbara's husband, filming the scene with a smirk. Little did he know that smirk would come back to haunt him. "If I may," I said steadily, my voice cutting through the din like it did in more formal settings, "I've taken the liberty of reviewing our neighborhood's property records." I opened my laptop and connected it to the projector. Actually, property values have increased by 12% since I moved in. The only decline was due to Karen's unauthorized pool installation, which cracked her neighbor's foundation. The room fell silent. Karen's mouth opened and closed almost like a fish out of water. But I wasn't finished. I also have satellite images showing that Barbara's new fence extends 3 feet into public land, which is why I've received citations for Max being off-leash in what is actually a public area. Barbara's face drained of color. "This meeting is adjourned," she declared hastily, gathering her papers. But it was too late. The damage was done. Other residents began raising their hands, eager to share their own experiences of harassment and unfair treatment. That's when Karen completely lost her cool. Marching up to Max, who remained perfectly still despite her aggressive demeanor, she declared, "This dog is dangerous. Just look at how it's growling at me." Everyone could see that Max wasn't making a sound. He attempted to confront my beloved Bella, and just yesterday, I pulled out my phone to show a security camera clip from my front yard. In the video, my leashed Chihuahua charged at us while Max, my service dog, calmly guided me away. The footage was clear for everyone to see, and several neighbors gasped in surprise. Barbara, one of the board members, banged her gavel in frustration, claiming it was an unauthorized recording. "You can't do that," she insisted. I replied steadily, "Actually, I can. The HOA bylaws only prohibit recording private homes. Common areas are fair game." Years spent reading through legislative details had finally come in handy. As the meeting descended into chaos, I noticed Tom quietly slip out a side door, his phone in hand as he texted someone urgently. Max perked up, sensing something that I wasn't aware of at the moment. If I'd only paid closer attention, I might have seen what was coming. Karen erupted in anger, storming out and yelling back, "This isn't over. You'll regret moving into my neighborhood." Her threat sent a chill through me, not from fear, but because I understood the type of people I was dealing with. Individuals like Karen and Barbara were precisely why I had dedicated my career to fighting for housing reform. As Max and I walked home beneath the setting sun, I noticed several neighbors taking down their "No Pets Allowed" signs. It felt like a small victory, but there was something in the air that felt more serious. Max, as usual, was relaxed but alert, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. I began to realize this situation was about more than just a service dog. It was about power, control, and standing up to bullies. The next morning would change everything. I woke up early that Sunday, greeted by the cheerful chirping of birds. Max nudged my hand gently, signaling that it was time for our routine. The sun was just starting to peek through the clouds, and the grass was still dewy, perfect conditions for Max's training exercises. As I stepped into the backyard, something felt off. The usual calm of our morning ritual was interrupted by whispers coming from Karen's yard. I tried to ignore it. We had grown accustomed to her incessant spying. Max remained focused on his tasks, just as he had been trained. His golden fur shimmered in the morning light, a daily reminder of why he was much more than a pet. Suddenly I heard Karen's back door slam. "You're filming this, right, Tom?" Her shrill voice carried over the fence. "We need evidence of this nuisance." I took a deep breath and chose to focus on Max. We had already filed 3 police reports about their ongoing harassment, and my lawyer was building a strong case. Suddenly, Max's ears perked up, and he shifted his body slightly to place himself between me and the fence. Something he only did when he sensed danger. I heard footsteps crunching on the leaves along the property line where Karen had been complaining about my garden bed. "Hey, your mud is threatening my wife!" Tom's voice boomed from the other side of the fence. I turned slowly, keeping my voice steady, a skill I had learned to master during tense negotiations. "Max is a trained service animal, Tom. He's not threatening anyone." Just then, Karen appeared above the fence, her phone aimed at us. "We've warned you about this dangerous animal," she shouted. "Property values are dropping because of you." Her voice crackled with the same entitlement I had witnessed at every HOA meeting. I reached for my phone, ready to record any false claims they might make. It was then that I saw Tom emerge from behind his garage, holding something that sent a chill through me. The morning sunlight reflected off the metal of his home security weapon. "Tom," I said calmly, raising my hands, "think very carefully about what you're doing." Max remained perfectly still, his training kicking in even amidst the tension. He was doing exactly what he was supposed to do, keeping me safe and staying calm. "I'm the head of neighborhood security," Tom shouted, his face flushed with anger. "I'm protecting our community." Karen continued filming, her smile growing wider with every moment. Everything happened so quickly after that. A neighbor's car backfired in the distance, and Karen screamed something about an attack. Tom's finger tightened on the trigger. I lunged for Max, but I was too slow. The shot rang out, echoing through the quiet morning like thunder. Max yelped in pain, and in that instant, my world shattered into pieces. My brave partner collapsed onto the freshly cut grass, his golden fur stained red. "Self-defense," Karen yelled, still recording. We all saw it. The dog was aggressive, but her voice faltered as other neighbors began to emerge from their homes, phones raised, capturing the truth of what had just occurred. I cradled Max's head in my lap, my training kicking in just enough to apply pressure to his wound. His brown eyes looked up at me, filled with trust, even in that moment. In the distance, sirens wailed. Someone had called for help. My hands trembled as I took out my phone. I pressed the emergency contact I hoped I'd never have to use. "Sarah, it's James. Get the legal team now." I could hear Karen's sharp intake of breath as she recognized my voice, the same voice she had heard on C-SPAN just last week during the Housing Committee hearing. Tom's weapon dropped to the ground, but none of that mattered now. Not Karen's stuttering excuses, not Tom's suddenly pale face, and not even the sirens of approaching police cars. The only thing that mattered was Max's heartbeat under my hands, weakening with each passing second. As I lifted my brave partner into my car, I made 2 promises. Max would survive, and those responsible would understand why they shouldn't mess with a congressman's service dog. The neighbors gathered around, watching in stunned silence as I sped toward the emergency vet, leaving Karen and Tom to confront the army of law enforcement descending on our once quiet street. They thought they could argue about property values, but they were about to learn the true cost of their actions. Would Max hold on long enough for me to deliver the justice he deserved? Sitting in the emergency vet's waiting room, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Max's blood stained my favorite blue shirt. Each tick of the wall clock felt like torture as I anxiously awaited news about my best friend. Whenever the door swung open, my heart leapt, hoping for updates on his condition. My phone buzzed. Sarah, my chief of staff, was calling for the 5th time. I finally answered, my voice barely above a whisper. "They shot him, Sarah. They actually shot my dog." "Sir, you need to turn on the news right now," she replied urgently. "Someone posted a video of the shooting on social media. It's everywhere." With trembling fingers, I pulled out my tablet and clicked on the first link she sent. The video played shaky footage from a neighbor's second-story window, Tom with his gun, Karen screaming about property values, and Max's yelp that would haunt my nightmares forever. It already had over 1 million views. Suddenly, the emergency room doors burst open, and Barbara Thompson stormed in, her designer handbag swinging wildly as she waved her phone in my face. "You're him! You're actually him!" Her perfectly made-up face had gone pale, mascara slightly smudged. "You're Congressman Sullivan." I stood up slowly, drawing myself to my full height. Years of keeping my identity private while living in the community had just unraveled in an instant. "I understand you're feeling overwhelmed, Barbara. You and your husband have just been caught on video shooting a service dog, which is protected by law." You stepped back, almost knocking over a chair, yet you didn't speak up. You let people believe you were just another resident. "I chose your neighborhood because it promised a quiet place where I could focus on my housing reform bill without attracting attention. Instead, I found harassment directed at a disabled veteran and his service dog." In an instant, Karen burst through the door, anger on her face but fear in her eyes. "This is a trick. He's lying," she insisted. But her voice faltered when she noticed the news playing on the TV, showing my official congressional photo alongside footage of the shooting. My phone continued to buzz with messages from Congress members, media outlets, veteran groups, and disability advocates. The story about Max was trending nationwide. The vet tech who had taken Max back rushed in, still in her bloody scrubs. My heart raced as I approached her. "Is he okay?" I asked, my anxiety rising. "He's stable," the vet tech replied softly. "The bullet missed his vital organs, but he'll need surgery. Dr. Patterson wants to discuss it with you." A wave of relief washed over me, only to be quickly replaced by anger. I turned to Barbara and Karen, who were now huddled together near the exit. "I've spent the last year working on housing reform legislation," I explained. "Now I will be adding provisions specifically addressing service animals and HOA oversight. Your actions will be Exhibit A in congressional hearings." Karen's expression crumbled. "But what about our property values and community standards?" she protested. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "Property values? Check your real estate apps, Karen. News travels fast. Houses in Oak Estates are already being listed below market value. Turns out, shooting a congressman's service dog isn't great for the neighborhood's reputation." Frantically, Barbara began scrolling through Zillow, her gasp revealing that she'd noticed the declining prices. "We can fix this. We'll drop all complaints and pay the vet bills," she pleaded. "It's too late for that," I replied, pulling out a folder from my briefcase. Inside were copies of their harassing letters, photos of my vandalized garden, and recordings of discriminatory HOA meetings. "The FBI is already investigating. Interfering with a service animal is a federal crime. Dr. Patterson is ready for you," I said, gathering my things. I noticed Barbara slumping into a chair, her face buried in her hands. Meanwhile, Karen seemed frozen, staring at her phone as a flurry of angry comments filled the HOA's social media pages. As I stepped through the door to see Max, I heard Barbara softly ask, "What have we done?" I paused, my hand on the door handle, and looked back one last time. "You tried to ruin my life and harm my dog because you thought I wouldn't fight back. Now you'll discover what real power is, the power of the law, which you tried so hard to disregard." The next few hours would be significant, but for now my focus was solely on Max. As I entered the room, I couldn't shake the thought, would rescuing him cost me everything I had built while serving in Congress, or could this moment define my career? Outside my window, the news vans lined the street, like vultures waiting for a story. I watched as Karen Martinez paced her front lawn in her designer yoga pants, desperately trying to shoo away reporters while juggling her phone. The panic on her face contrasted starkly with her usual smug demeanor. Max's blood hadn't even dried on my patio, and already their perfect world was unraveling. My phone buzzed again. It was another text from my chief of staff. The story had gone national. Congress member's service dog shot by HOA board member. Social media was raging with outrage. As I scrolled through Twitter, I saw security camera footage that had gone viral. The clear audio of Karen screaming about property values just moments before Tom fired the shot was damning. There was no spinning this story to save their reputations. A knock at my door made Max whimper from his bed, the bandage on his side a painful reminder of their actions. Through the peephole, I recognized Barbara Thompson, her hands wringing together, her hair now disheveled. I opened the door just enough to hear her nervous plea. "Congressman Sullivan, please, we can work something out. We didn't know who you were. Karen was just trying to protect our community standards. Tom made a terrible mistake. What will it take to keep this quiet?" A cold smile crept across my face. "Protect community standards? Let me show you something, Barbara." I pulled out my tablet and opened a file my team had put together. Here's a list of every HOA violation notice in OJ states for the past 5 years. Do you notice anything unusual about who received them? As I looked through the data, I noticed the color drain from her face. Every complaint linked to the yard maintenance and community rules seemed to target minorities, disabled residents, or elderly homeowners on fixed incomes. The pattern was clear and hard to overlook. I softly mentioned to her this no longer just about Max. While she was caught up in the situation with my service dog, my team had been investigating similar issues of HOA abuse nationwide. Oak Ridge Estates was now a prime example. Suddenly, a commotion pulled our attention away. Karen was yelling at a reporter who had stepped onto her cherished lawn. "You don't understand. Property values matter the most. We can't have dogs running around. It attracts the wrong kind of people." The reporter's camera captured every moment. I almost felt sympathy for her, almost. Then my phone buzzed with a notification. The housing reform bill I had been quietly advocating for was starting to gain traction. Colleagues who hesitated before were now reaching out to co-sponsor it. It's interesting how a viral video of HOA misconduct involving a congressman's service dog could shift the political landscape. Barbara stood there, visibly shaken. "What do you want from us?" she asked. I handed her a thick envelope. "Here's your chance to make things right. Inside is my proposal for a complete overhaul of Oak Ridge Estates. It includes new board elections, third-party oversight, and mandatory civil rights training for all board members. You need to sign this now, or I will bring your discriminatory actions to my congressional testimony next week." She took the envelope but struggled to open it due to her trembling hands. In the background, I noticed Tom being escorted out of his house in handcuffs. The police had arrived to arrest him for animal cruelty and recklessly discharging a firearm. Meanwhile, Karen was sobbing on her phone, likely calling her lawyer. Max limped over to me, his tail wagging weakly as he watched the events unfold. I patted him behind the ears, recalling the many nights he had helped me through my PTSD. How could they even think of taking him away from me? Just then, a new message came through. It was a resident sending photos of years' worth of HOA documents being shredded in Barbara's garage the previous night. It was more evidence in our investigation. The situation was unraveling quickly, faster than they could cover their tracks. Protesters began to gather at the entrance of the community, holding signs with Max's picture and calling for justice. Local news crews interviewed residents who had long been silenced by the HOA's threats. An elderly woman sat, tears streaming down her face, as she talked about the fine that pushed her close to bankruptcy, simply for having a wheelchair ramp. Nearby, a Latino family shared their struggles, showing proof of being cited for the cooking odors from their traditional family meals. Barbara's hand shook as she signed the documents. "Please," she whispered, "my husband's on the city council. This will ruin us." I looked over the papers, checking each signature. "You should have thought about the consequences before you shot a congressman's service dog. But don't worry, you'll have plenty of time to reflect during the federal investigation. As she hurried away, I noticed Karen being interviewed on live television, attempting to justify her actions. I had no idea he was in Congress. We just wanted to uphold our standards. Dogs reduce property values by 15%, she insisted. The reporter interrupted, asking, "Ma'am, do you realize that discriminating against service animals is a federal crime, regardless of the owner's position?" After closing my door, I sank down next to Max. My phone buzzed with calls from major news networks, other Congress members, and disability rights organizations. I would address it all tomorrow. I would work to turn this crisis into a push for real change. For now, I watched through the window as karma played out, holding Max close. "We got them, buddy. We finally got them." Another news van pulled up outside, and I couldn't help but wonder how many other homeowners associations across the country would soon face their reckoning. The vet had told me Max wouldn't walk the same way again, but they didn't know his spirit. I watched him take his first unsteady steps in our living room, his golden fur still patchy from surgery. The news vans eventually left, but the strain on Oaked Estates remained. Every time Max flinched at a loud noise, my heart broke again. I heard that Karen Martinez's ideal life was falling apart. She even tried selling her house, but who would want to buy from someone who had helped shoot a congressman's service dog? My phone lit up with messages from fellow representatives and senators inquiring about Max. The story had resonated nationwide. Last week, I spotted Karen attempting to sneak into my backyard, her phone in hand, likely looking for something else to complain about. This time, however, I was prepared. The security cameras I had installed captured everything, including her attempt to plant false evidence of dog waste. This time, the police weren't as lenient with her. Barbara Thompson, our former HOA president, reached out, reinforcing that the fallout from this incident was just beginning. A letter arrived from her, asking to meet and explain herself. She seemed desperate to set things right. I read her letter twice before deciding to let Max use it as a chew toy. Their apologies felt hollow, especially after uncovering years of deceit. Other homeowners began to share their own stories about how Barbara and Karen had unfairly targeted vulnerable groups, including the elderly and single parents, by inventing violations. As the media investigated our HOA's past, they found recordings of board meetings where Karen bragged about pressuring a young widow to sell her home because of her crying baby. Barbara had even sent emails indicating they wanted to keep certain people out of our neighborhood to protect our values. Their own words turned against them, revealing the true nature of their actions. We also learned that Tom, Barbara's husband who shot Max, had been dishonest about his security credentials. He didn't actually have a license to carry a firearm, which caught the attention of the police. Meanwhile, Max's physical therapy sessions became a highlight for us. Other local dog owners brought treats and encouragement. Even Mrs. Jackson, who was known for complaining about everything, showed up with homemade dog biscuits. It felt like the community was beginning to heal. Not everyone welcomed this change. Karen started a counter-campaign on social media, claiming she was the victim. She shared edited videos of Max barking, but my security footage showed her agitating him deliberately. This backfired, as her followers dwindled along with property values in the neighborhood. Then I received an unexpected visitor, Emma, Karen's teenage daughter. She came over one afternoon, tears in her eyes, to apologize for her mother's behavior. Emma had been secretly recording the HOA meetings for months, appalled by how they treated others. Her recordings became key evidence in the federal investigation. Just last night, I watched Max play with the neighborhood kids for the first time since the incident. He still limped, but his tail wagged with joy. A reporter asked if I would consider dropping the charges if Barbara and Karen apologized. I thought about Max, about the blood on his fur and the fear he experienced. Some wounds can't be healed with a simple apology. The old HOA board's office was now empty, their rule books gathering dust. The interim resident council found documents revealing that Barbara and Karen had been siphoning HOA fees into their personal accounts for years. They had underestimated how far the truth would go. They seemed untouchable in their perfect little world, never imagining that a congressman and his three-legged dog could change everything. Tomorrow, Max has another vet checkup. His recovery is slow, but every day he teaches me a little more about resilience. As I sit on my porch and watch the sunset, I notice Karen packing boxes into her car. Her house finally sold, but for half of what she wanted. It's interesting how life balances things out sometimes. Yet, as I glance at the certified letter from her lawyer sitting on my desk, I can't help but wonder if this battle is truly over or if Karen has one last surprise up her sleeve.